What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHogs42 on the internet, and in this edition of the Overthinking MTG Podcast, I want to talk about a card that I got to play in the Wilds of Eldraine streamer event. Now, this card is really splashy, it's big, and it's powerful. And I actually talked about it when I did kind of the first preview roundup, actually the only preview roundup I ended up doing. Lich-Knight's Conquest. This thing is splashy, it's sexy, it's a reanimator spell. Of course, I was interested. If you're not familiar, Lich-Knight's Conquest is a sorcery for 4 and a black. Sacrifice any number of artifacts, enchantments, and or tokens. Return that many creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So I experimented with this in a couple of different ways. I tried using the rats, that are in Wilds of Eldraine as enablers. That ended up not being as consistent as I'd hoped, as well as a couple of other like token generators. The place where the rubber met the road, though, is when I finally accepted that I needed to focus on material that was going to fill my graveyard. Because in situations with this, if you're creating a lot of tokens, that's great, and you can get a large number, of effects. I mean, this is effectively multi-bargain is what we're doing. We're satisfying multiple bargains for each one we do. We get to reanimate a creature. For 5 mana, reanimating multiple creatures is incredibly powerful, but those creatures have to be in your graveyard to begin with. And that's where I decided to start leaning on a couple of other tech pieces that leave bargain fodder back while filling the graveyard. The first of which is one that's in Wilds of Eldraine, Collector's Vault. This is an artifact for 2. You can pay 2 tap, draw a card, discard a card, create a treasure. So here it's an artifact itself. It puts a card into your graveyard, and it creates a treasure. So the treasure can help you ramp to the 5 mana, and it gives you more material that you can bargain. If you have 5 mana elsewhere, you can actually sacrifice both the Collector's Vault and the treasure that you generated, or possibly the 2 treasure that you generated, to reanimate the things that the Collector's Vault put into your graveyard. So it's a perfect setup piece for Lich-Knight's Conquest. It feels like it was made for it, in fact, and the fact that they show up in the same set, they likely were. So great, let's take advantage. Collector's Vault ultimately feels like a very, very slimmed down version of Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Fable would have obviously set up Lich-Knight's Conquest perfectly, but the reality is Fable was just busted regardless and was phenomenal value in and of itself. So, being a fixed Fable still has an opportunity to be a pretty good card if you're setting off payoffs like this. So, the other thing, if you're trying to make Lich-Knight's Conquest work in Standard, the other thing to note is that a lot of cards that would have been rotating give us the kind of material that we're looking for. And so we also have cards like the Teachings of the Kirin. So this is a saga, itself is an enchantment and can be sacrificed to the Conquest. And it also mills you 3 cards and creates a 1/1 spirit token. So it's doing all the things we want. It's filling our graveyard, it produces a token, and it itself is an enchantment. So if we get a good mill on this, we can get some targets into our graveyard, and all of a sudden, we are fully set up. Once we get to 5 mana, we've got 2 things that we can sacrifice, and on top of that, with Teachings of the Kirin specifically, it flips into the Kirin Touched Orochi, which if it attacks, has an opportunity to possibly make another token as well. So it's doing all of the things we want, and it gives us a ton of material. On that same vein, we also have access to the Modern Age. So this is another card that can really help you abuse and set up Lich-Knight's Conquest. Now you'll note, with these setup pieces, we're putting permanents on the board that are not impacting combat. That is very notable and definitely a bummer, but that is the price that we have to pay to really pay off the Conquest itself. So at the end of the day, how much do you want it is really the question. So against aggro opponents, a deck that's going all in on Lich-Knight's Conquest is sacrificing early tempo. If your opponent is going aggressive, you're going to get beat down. If you can get to 5 mana, there's a high likelihood you're going to be able to reanimate something that can really check what they're doing. Even in Standard right now, we have cards like Atraxa, Toxrill, that can easily deal with aggressive opponents, or Etali, of course, which is just absolutely insane. So, and on top of that, if you're doing Lich Knights, you might be getting multiples of them. There were times during the early access event where I was able to reanimate Toxrill and Atraxa and Etali all simultaneously. And for the record, for that particular event, I only put one of each of those targets, except Toxrill. I had two of him. But I didn't lean into the known reanimator threats as hard as I could have, and I will once this goes standard. When this is in standard, that deck is going to have a lot of Atraxas, it's going to have a lot of Etalis, and Toxrill is probably going to be coming out of the sideboard. That said, there is another card in Wilds of Eldraine that can also synergize with Lich-Knight's Conquest that I want to call out, and that is Gruff Triplets. So this card, if you are doing any kind of green-based reanimation, this thing is nasty. It is a 3/3 for 6, 3 green, with trample. When it enters the battlefield, if it isn't a token, you create 2 tokens that are copies of it. And whenever Gruff Triplets dies, you put +1/+1 counters equal to its power onto all other copies of Gruff Triplets that you have in play. If you can get multiple Gruff Triplets online, which Lich-Knight's Conquest, if you go all in, can theoretically get you 2 to 3 Gruff Triplets. I mean, the dream is 4, but the likelihood of that happening is just so low. But 2 is very reasonable if you have 4 in your deck, depending on how hard you mill and loot. But if you get 2 Gruff Triplets down on turn 5, or even turn 4 if you're using the Collector's Vault or the ramp pieces, all of a sudden, you've just put 6 bodies online, and your opponent isn't necessarily going to want them to die in combat, because then all the other ones are going to get bigger and they're going to get murdered on the crackback. So it's one of those situations, it creates a scenario where you put your opponent in that moment of, all right, this is board wipe or bust. Can you deal with these? And that's ultimately what I want a good reanimation strategy to do. I want to have that turn where it fires, and if they don't have a counterspell, it puts them in a bind where the whole game I'm getting beat up as I'm trying to set up my thing, but the moment I do my thing, I'm going to get a massive advantage, and my opponent is going to be on the back foot all of a sudden. And Gruff Triplets has that potential. And on top of that, since it's a 6-drop, if you top deck it in the late game and don't have any setup pieces, it's still a good card to drop. And the fact that it can block 3 attackers is what makes it especially, important and valuable in this kind of deck. It throws off your aggressive opponent's combat math a lot. So between Gruff Triplets and Toxrill, reanimator strategies, especially when you can reanimate multiple things here, has an opportunity to really check aggro in a really powerful way. That said, this strategy that we're discussing is going to have a difficult time finding success against control. And control is everywhere right now. Esper control decks are very, very popular, and Azorius control decks are also out there. Heck, I've seen even Orzhov decks that have a very controlling shell and are all about like wiping the board and stalling the game out in the hopes of winning off of the Wandering Emperor or a Shale Dread after I've run out of gas trying to get everything established. Those decks are out there. People are running that style, and especially in a format where Disdainful Stroke is legal twice. I'm being a little facetious with that, but we have literally 2 different printings of Disdainful Stroke that would have put that into standard. Wilds of Eldraine has a printing, and then we also have one from Streets of New Capenna, which would have rotated had rotation been a thing. So they clearly want Disdainful Stroke to be around forever. We also have various quenches. We have Make Disappear. There's also Spell Stutter right now. So and Spell Pierce is legal in the format as well. So trying to get an all-in tap-out 5-drop to actually stick right now is difficult. So be aware of that. There are certain matchups where this deck is going to fold really hard, but in others, it can be a lot of fun. So I have every intention. I did have a build of this for the early access event. Unfortunately, I didn't get a lot of good, clean footage, so I don't have a deck tech of that at this point, but I will be experimenting more with it after Wilds of Eldraine releases on Arena. So keep an eye out for that. If you want to see those brews in action, twitch.tv/hamhawks42, and keep an eye out on this channel, and I will no doubt be doing a gameplay video on it at some point. So keep an eye out for that. I also want to give a huge thank you to my Patreon or patrons who make this possible, and my channel members. Thank you. Y'all are the best. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and know that I'll be here doing more of these, and I'll catch you on the next one.